Okay, hello, good morning. Sorry, was just someone just put our youngest to sleep outside, and of course there's a fucking lawnmower truck passing by. Anyways, yeah, I was not in a good mood yesterday. Like I felt like super in control, even though it's insanely like it's stressful at home, not getting enough sleep and everything. I really felt in control at work. But yesterday I started feeling like, oh shit, this is not working out the way I hoped. And I kind of felt that way last night as well, when our youngest just wakes up in the middle of the night and he has no intention of falling back to sleep. And you irrationally start to think like, he's doing this on purpose, isn't he? Of course he's not, but yeah, that kind of stuff makes things extra stressful. But I think I'm just excited. Like in a couple of weeks now at work, we're really going to start focusing. Like we've done a lot of environment and architecture stuff, and we're really going to get into the product itself, and I'm super excited about that. And it just feels like I feel bad because I think about that a lot in terms of family, and then when things aren't working out in the family, like in terms of sleep and all that stuff, it stresses me out because I'm worried that it's going to ruin everything at work. Well, for me personally at work. Yeah. So yeah, not in the best mood today either, but I did, what is this? That's something else. I did fix something. Let's see. Yes. So we had an issue with our matcher, like the match API. Like it's so interesting that the whole React state thing is built on 3 utility functions, like every one of those being a one-liner, but the power of them comes from the typing. So I can like match on the auth here, and I get like exhaustive typing on that. The problem is that I can't set the expected return type because this is a generic. This auth here is generic. That's how it's able to infer the correct typing here. And then it also infers the return types. So if I do like this, and here I return a number, and here I return like a string. Well, I have to type everything. Let's do a number here as well. Then it infers that it's either a string or a number, which is great, right? But what if I actually want to ensure that all of these are the same? I can't do that because of the generic. So what I did is I made it a partial application. So a partial application is like you pass one argument, and then you get back a function for passing the last argument. So here I'm saying I'm going to match auth. And when I match it, and now the generic is done, like now it has inferred auth. So when I now go in here, and this second function is inferring the return type, but here I can actually say, this is what I want as a return type. So yeah, this actually works. But anyways, we wanted to actually implement the auth. And I also want to move this so it's this is kind of the initial context, but it can come from the outside, and this is related to testing. Yeah, and can I do this? Oh, match auth. I really do want to override it. That's the thing. Like you shouldn't override variables like this, but in this case I really do want to override it. So let's say that's okay. So we say that okay, the initial context should be whatever comes from the outside if it's defined. If it's not defined, we're going to match on the auth state, And if it's authenticating, we're going to say that the dashboard is awaiting authentication. If it's authenticated, we'll move right into the loading state. And if it's unauthenticated, we're going to move into a requiring authentication, which would show the model. So yeah, we haven't implemented the auth yet, but we're going to do that. But let's just finish this. So we have return dashboard context provider, and the value here would be dashboard states, and we need the children here. Cool. And currently we're not going to like start executing any side effects here. We are going to do that a little bit later, where we're actually going to type the state and everything. But let's move on to our auth feature. So new folder. I'm just going to give my girlfriend a baby monitor thing. 2 seconds. Right, let's see. Yes. Let's see. The auth, we need to add a file frat index. Yeah, let's just do this. So we need to define auth context, and this auth context should be authenticating, or we are authenticated, or we are unauthenticated. We could have an error here as well, and I think we're going to add that. And then we have auth event. So the events we have here now is that you might require, like the user might click a button. Type. And that should be sign in required. Because the thing is, I don't want these events to be named like part of the UI, like sign in clicked. That's like it's not, it doesn't care about the UI. It's detached from the UI. So it's just requiring a sign in. And then that sign in can be a success or an error, but we're going to make those symbols because those aren't going to be triggered from the outside. So sign in success. It's a symbol of sign in success. And then we have sign in error, which is of sign in error. Now the thing is, we also have to think about, we all sometimes think about state as like authenticating, authenticated, and authenticated, and error. And that isn't wrong, but there are two different ways. Like when you mount the application, you're actually verifying the authentication. That's what's happening there. That's a different state than actually signing in, because that's based on user interaction. So I want to make that explicit here. I know like the examples in documentation uses this concept, but it's just to simplify. But it kind of shows how you should really think about these states. It's not about the technical state, it's about the actual flow state. And there's a difference, because you could say that technically verifying if you're signed in is like the same as signing in. You kind of get the same response. But it isn't. It's two different things. It's the one of them happens automatically when you open a page, the other one happens based on user interaction. So you would draw this actually differently in like a flow chart or like an Excalibur draw. So let's do that. verifying authentication, and then we are unauthenticated, and then we're going to have signing in. So let's see. Oops. So either of these two can lead to the authenticated or unauthenticated or error state, but they are two different things. So we should call these authentication success and authentication error. Cool. Not required, requested, sorry. I requested the sign-in. And then we have the authentication success. And this should give us a user. Now the question is, what is this user? So let's export a user type. And what do we actually... Yeah, and this is the interesting thing. We are going to export a new type here. But we're going to say import, where do we have the user? Environment, oh, where are we? Environment, auth, what's it called, the user? There we have it. Oh, what the hell? We actually have a user. And the thing is, one of the practices of this architecture is that when you consume a feature and that feature uses types from other parts of the application, like typically from the environment, it should re-export that type. And the reason is simply that if you consume a feature, you should be able to point to any of the types in the any of the context by importing it from the same feature. So you don't have to, oh, where is this type? Like, oh, is it here or over there, or stuff like that. So I think we should think about renaming user to DTO. I like the term DTO, data transfer object, because it just points to this is the stuff that actually comes from the server. It's not necessarily what you need, but it's the stuff that's coming from the server. And it fits really well here. So the environment talks about DTOs and stuff like that. But when you actually consume it in a feature, exposing it to the UI, that's when you have types like user, like conceptually thinking about it as a user. And very often you just re-export the DTO. Like you want to actually use everything from the DTO, but other times you might just do this, right? And whenever you consume, in this example, the auth environment, and you resolve a user, that will be a user DTO. But you're passing it in as a user, right? So that means that the typing is perfectly fine, because yes, the user DTO does have a name, so it's compatible. But you will technically have two more properties there, because that's part of the DTO. But that's the point. Like, you can be very specific about the type in the feature, because this is what the feature kind of exposes to you. But technically, there might be other things there. But anyways, let's do this. And then we're going to say authenticated. We do have a user. And here comes a user. Well, I guess we can say user DTO here. And then let's add the last one, which is the error. And let's just say error is a string. Cool. Okay, so we set up our states and the events. So let's implement the actual thing. Auth context is create states context, which is of auth context and auth event. Let's create the hook. Use auth create states hook. that just takes auth context, and then let's create the auth reducer, which is create states reducer, and this is a reducer of auth context and auth event, which needs to deal with all of this stuff: verifying authentication, signing in, authenticated. Well, let's do unauthenticated, authenticated. By the way, I'm going to like this tiny mini seminar thing at 10. So we'll have to stop then. But we got some time now. That's good. Let's see. So let's auth feature equals, yeah, we have to export the props as well. This will be children React node. Initial context would be auth context, and let's do props, and we'll say, let's do this, and let's say we get children here, and initial context, we'll set that to state verifying authentication. That's where we start. So let's set up our auth states, use reducer, auth reducer, and the initial context, and then let's return auth context provider value is the auth states, and we have the children. There we go. Okay, this is nice. Now we're set up for everything. So let's actually implement how this should work. And like, we're using the sandbox environment now, and if you remember, we have like we have everything set up for us here. So we can basically just, so authenticate is like verifying authentication, and then sign in is actually signing in, and both of them kind of just gives us a user, which is perfectly fine. Oh, here we go. So let's see, when we are verifying authentication, we are going to use our private things here. Authenticated, and this should give us a user, and then we have error, and this should give us an error, state error. Yeah, so let's give the error an actual error. Cool. Okay, so when we're verifying this, and this should be the same when we're signing in. When we're unauthenticated, we should allow sign in requested, which moves us into state signing in. And when we're unauthenticated, like, we could have a sign out requested. We don't really have that now. If we have an error, we're just going to show that error for now. Yes, so this is basically how it should work. When we mount it up, it will do verifying authentication, where we might have a success and error. Oh, how do we move to, oh, sorry, not error. Yeah, sorry, what should we call this? So the thing is, let's see, where is it? So as you can see here, we have an auth error, but this should be either how are we going to do? Oh, sorry, not authenticated. There we have it. I remember now. So we want to, like, when you authenticate, you should always get a user. We expect that. If you aren't authenticated, it will actually give you an error. Yeah, I think this can actually be part of the error type. So like, whatever you do in terms of authentication, you might get a not authenticated error. And what this does is authentication success. So we have authentication error. This is when there's like an error, but we might also have maybe we should call it authentication like valid or something. Authentication, we should not call it success. Authentication oh, what should we call it? Success? Like unsuccess? What's the... Oh, we can say fail. Authentication failed. Failed. Or we could say like authentication resolved, authentication rejected. Yeah, I think we're going to say failed. And then we have error. So if it, let's do this one. We don't actually get anything on, oops, authentication failed. But let's see, we don't get the user there, but we're going to move to unauthenticated. And when you're signing in, like you can't really get like a failed authentication, like because you're signing in, and if it doesn't work, you get an error, right? But if you're verifying the authentication, it would say, I should rename this. Maybe we should be specific. Sign in success. Yeah, I think this is better. Sign in success, sign in error. We can be explicit about this. I think that's better. And then we have authentication success. Authentication user. What the fuck? What should we call these? Either we verified. What is this? What are we doing when we mount our applications and we like check if the user is and is it a success if you don't have a user? Like it is a success. You're just checking if there's a user there. So it's like authentication exists and authentication missing, and then authentication error. I think you can say that, can't you? And like again, it looks like I'm completely overcomplicating things, and definitely to some extent I am doing that, but I'm doing this as an exercise to actually think about how the application actually works. And typically I've never seen validating the user amount and signing in as two different things. Like I try to make things dry. If it's technically the same thing, I implement it as the same thing. But that's a bad thing because you don't see that there are two different flows. So you try to fix a bug with signing in, and then suddenly you broke in like the validation of the user when you mount the application. So that's really interesting. Let's see. Let's put you together. And then we have sign in error string. Cool. Yeah, and this, oh, let's move these so they're kind of stuck together. So sign in requested, sign in success, or sign in error. Or we do authentication exists, authentication missing, authentication error. So here we would have authentication exists, authentication missing, or authentication error. And then we would have sign in success and sign in error. Like so. There we have it. That's like the full set of transition and states and events. So what we can do now is we can actually implement the effect here, and the effect would be to execute. Let me just spread these two. And the effect here would be auth. Let's put auth in there. We want to, how is this happening? Don't ask again. So when we are when we are verifying authentication, we want to use our, oh, I think this is also called the auth. What should we name that? Let's just name this context, and we're context. So we're using context here instead. So when we're verifying authentication, we want to point to our environment effect and say authenticate. And when that resolves, we either get a user here where we say send type, what was it? Authentication exists. And we need to add the user, or we might get some errors here. So we might have not authenticated, which should send the type of authentication missing, or we might get an actual error there. Is that unknown? Oh yeah, I'm not saying, like, maybe we should do a data string. Error. And now we send type authentication error. And let's attach the error there. Cool. So this is properly handling it. We're authenticating. If we have a user, we say that authentication exists. If we're not authenticated, it's considered an error. We say that authentication is missing, or if it's an actual error, we say authentication error. And then we have signing in. So if we move to signing in, we're going to say auth sign in, and we're going to resolve that to, well, again, it's going to be resolved to like a user, but in this case, we are going to say send type sign in success with the user. Let's see, and then we are going to say, oh yeah, we could, oh, this is, yeah, maybe not authenticated is valid for all the endpoints. Like, you can't sign in and then be not authenticated. Can you? Well, I guess you can. Like, technically, yeah. So for Google, for example, if I do open, like, I'd click sign in, but then I exit before I actually like allow the application, it actually does move into. That's interesting. Yeah. So we'll, yeah. Oh, this is really interesting. And this is what I mean. Like, I'm really thinking about this. I'm kind of discovering things that should be handled. So not authenticated, this could definitely happen. But in this case, I'm considering this an error. So I'm going to actually send an error, but I'm going to type it here. Like you did not like, what's it called when if you abort, like we could not authenticate you. I'll just write that for now. And then we have error, and this actually receives an error, and then we'll pass. That's the same as this one. Yeah, so when we're verifying authentication, not being authenticated is considered like, okay, we're just not, like, you have to log in, right? But if you're not authenticated when actually signing in, that's a different thing. That's something where we try to actually we gave you the steps to sign in, but for some reason it didn't actually happen, which is probably because you aborted the flow, like the Google flow. So yeah, then we're considering that an error, at least in this case. You might think about that differently, but anyways, it's interesting to reflect on this. Okay, so this looks pretty good. Okay, so we have our auth now. Let's move back to the dashboard. We can now actually use auth, and now this is probably going to yell at us a little bit. Yes, because now these things aren't valid. Because now we have, this should be verifying authentication. And we want to move to the same when we're signing in. Let's just call it. So if we're signing in, we're also awaiting authentication. When we're actually authenticated, we move to loading. If we're unauthenticated, we're going to say that we're requiring authentication. And if we actually have an error, what are we going to do then? I think we're just going to, yeah, I haven't thought about this in terms of user experience. Like if we get an error related to verifying your, well, signing in really. I think. Well, this one is still awaiting authentication, that's for sure. Yeah, so if we have an error, the dashboard is still waiting, right, for you to authenticate. So that's right. Cool. So let's try to implement the dashboard effect, like actually loading up some data here. So first of all, we before we actually start loading some data, we have to let's do context send here as well. Dashboard states. We actually have to move this forward. Like we're waiting for the authentication, so we have to move this into a loading state first of all. So if we were authenticated, we would just move straight into loading. But if we're not, we have to wait for that to happen. So the way we do that is that we can use an effect on the actual auth. Now, and this is the auth feature. It's not the auth environment. I should probably rename that. Calling this auth and having a feature called auth, it doesn't make it better. Let's see. Anyways, so what we want to react to here is that if we're authenticated, we want to move. Did we create some events? Yeah, let's fix these events first. These should be data loaded, these should also be symbols because they are private. Also authenticated, that's considered private. And then unauthenticated is also considered private. So let's type of data loaded. We'll fix the actual type. Authenticated, and type of unauthenticated. Okay, so when we what happened now? Oh, sorry. Sorry. Of course. I do wonder how much benefit these symbols give. The good thing about the symbols is that they don't pop up when you consume the UI. So when you consume the UI and you use a feature, you only see the events that really the UI can trigger. Like these are invalid events for a UI to trigger. These are internal events. So I do think they are good, but I do like there's some boilerplate related to that. But anyways, so when the auth feature is authenticated, we are going to just send type, and this will be authenticated. I think maybe we should be a little bit more explicit here. Maybe we should say auth authenticated and auth. We're kind of prefixing it with the feature, which just makes it a little bit more explicit that this is what we're waiting for. Unauthenticated. Oops. But yeah, we're trying out a pattern here where we actually implement a dashboard feature that depends on the state of a different feature, in this case, authentication. Which is interesting. And all of this is actually because we want that skeleton to not jank, which is kind of insane. But at the same time, we are like separating our concerns, and yeah, we'll see how it feels at the end of it. Okay, so if we are unauthenticated, we want to move to auth unauthenticated, or we want to trigger the event that we are unauthenticated. And I guess if we get we can get an error as well, and that's also going to trigger that we are indeed unauthenticated. So what happens here is that when this dashboard feature mounts, it will first take a look at, let's ignore the initial context because that's for testing. It will first, so if you happen to open the dashboard itself, it will be here, verifying authentication, which means that the dashboard is awaiting authentication. And then it renders out the skeleton, and the auth feature itself is now awaiting this. And then the auth feature moves into authenticated, and that will update the dashboard here. It will run the authenticated effect, which sends a message into the dashboard that, okay, cool, now we actually have an authentication. Let's move into, authenticated. Let's move into the loading state. And then it updates again, and then it runs our effects related to actual loading. So this would be content. Let's call this dashboard. This is actually how it's going to be named. And then we can say, when you get loading, go ahead and start load up some stuff. So maybe we can go in here, we can say storage equals use environment. We have our storage here. So now we can say storage. Oh yeah. Yeah, because this is yeah, sorry, that's the thing we were talking about. Like now we have a family UID on, let's see, let's do this. Family storage will be, we have to call this. We need to pass in a family UID. And we talked about the auth feature has a user with the family UID. In the dashboard, we don't really care about like the user. What we care about is the family UID. So we need to pass that family UID to the dashboard so that it can actually use it. So basically what we want is that when you're loading, we want to have a family UID there, and we can also have that when we're loaded, in case we need to go and grab some more data, for example. So the way this would work is that when we have authenticated, we should have a family UID, which means that we have a family UID here, which will pass onto our context. We have a family UID here. And then when we're loading and we move to the loaded state, it's not the data loaded event that gives us the family UID. We already have it on the context. And then when we're authenticated here, we actually do, well, we have the user and we grab it from the user. Cool. And it will be the same here. We have a user. Let's add a family UID like this. Cool. So what we effectively done now is that when we're in a loading state or we are in a loaded state, we actually have the family UID, which means that in the loading state here now, we do have the family UID. We can pass that into the storage, and now we have a family storage. Like this might have, we talked about the storage being tied to a family UID, and we didn't want to explicitly pass in that family UID every time. So that's basically what we're doing here, because now we get a family storage back, which is tied to that family UID. And if we didn't do that, we still would have to do this. We would have to have the family UID available on the context of the dashboard to be able to load data for it. And the reason we are not just using it directly from the auth is because this could be in any state. The dashboard consumes the authentication feature in any state, right? Because we want to show the dashboard with its skeleton even though you're not authenticated. If we did a different strategy where we had a spinner at the beginning where it would verify the authentication first and the dashboard would only show when you're actually authenticated, this will be way simpler. We could just say use auth when you're authenticated, and then we could just use it here. We didn't have to introduce verifying, we didn't have to introduce awaiting authentication and stuff and requiring authentication and stuff like that. That would just be on the outside. But because we are merging these two concepts together, we add some complexity, but at least it's control complexity. That's the good thing. Okay, so I suggest we start loading up some data. I can't remember what data. Okay, we have 10 minutes left. Let's see. What do we want to grab here? We want to grab the groceries. We want to grab the tasks. We want to get the week. I guess that's what we want to do. We want to grab all three of those things. Yes, okay. So let's start exporting some types for these. So groceries, Groceries would be grocery. And let's call these DTOs as well. I'll start doing that from the get-go. Family DTO, this is the data. Oh, let me rename it. Rename symbol to DTO. Grocery category, well, that doesn't need to change, I think. Rename DTO, rename task DTO. And then we have week. And these are like, the reason I'm not saying DTO on these things is because they're not like actual data transfer objects. They aren't like nested into an actual data transfer object. Anyways, there we have our storage. And let's go back to our dashboard feature. And again, it's kind of funny, right? We haven't written any UI yet, and we're implementing all of this stuff. But let's see. Let's groceries. Yeah, I haven't really thought about this either. Should groceries be? Should we have a dictionary, or should we have an array? Or should we show them by category? I guess we should. Like I typically like to do this. ID string grocery and DTO. Well, so we need export type grocery would be grocery DTO. Now the question is, now it's currently returning an array. Like the storage is actually returning an array of grocery DTOs, and the question is, should we like, that means it's not specifically designed for our application. Like if our application actually wants this to be an object where you have the ID of the grocery, then it's let's see, grocery. So should it return an array, or should it be an object? I guess from the UI perspective, like if you add, do we ever want to reference a grocery by ID? Let's just do the array version first, and then we can discover it. Cool. And then we have export type task is task DTO. And then we have export type week equals week DTO. Oh, that's a funny thing. Yes. Oh, but do we now have? No. Yeah, exactly. Cool. Where are we? Dashboard feature. So what we want now, when we're loaded, we want to have our groceries. And we also want to have export type tasks equals task. We want our tasks. And we want our week. Okay. So when we do, yeah, this is wrong now because we want, let's see. When data is loaded, we should get groceries, tasks, and the week. We load everything. So what we do here is that we, how should we do this? Oh, how should we do this? Like we want to fetch it in parallel. Okay, I think I know what we want to do. Yeah, so this is interesting. So we don't want to return a promise here. We want to, what do we want to do here? I don't think we're taking this into account. Like typically what we would do is we would return family storage, like get groceries. We would resolve that. But the thing is we want to do this in parallel now, which means that we don't have a way to express this currently. I think. No, wait, we do. So dispose groceries, because that's what resolve returns. It resolves the disposer. Sorry, yeah. So what we rather do here, we manually return the disposing. So we resolve the groceries. Yeah, so we need like events for all of these. I have to go now, but let's continue this next time. Yeah, and what happens here? Like, what if we find the week, but we don't find... Yeah, this is interesting. Yeah, this also shows how like having explicit states helps a lot, because all these three things might go to no access because you're logged out for some reason. But we don't want to like trigger the logic like 3 times, but because we have explicit states, if any of these 3 triggers no access, it sends an event in which will do a state transition. And then the other 2 no access events, they will just be ignored because we transitioned the state, right? So this shows how easy it is to, well, how much it helps you deal with complex asynchronicity. But anyways, we're going to run all 3 of them here, and then we're going to like return the disposers as a single disposer. So if we were to move out to like a different page or something, then it would actually dispose of all 3 of them. But okay, so I guess we'll save here, and what we're going to do next time is to create the events for actually putting the groceries and the tasks and the week into the state. And we need to deal with all the errors that can happen. And then we have to decide, okay, what if just one of them errors? What are we going to do then? I guess we're just going to handle that as an actual error. Again, that's where it helps us, like complex asynchronicity. If one of them errors, we will move into... oh, this is also interesting. Yeah, this is interesting because we kind of want to load these. Oh shit, I have to go. We'll talk tomorrow. Okay, bye bye.